Hey there, welcome back to the Grandiose Project. My name is John Skane. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to photograph your artwork. So let's get started. So if you see this painting back here behind me, I just finished it. And today I'm going to photograph it and I'm going to show you how. So if you notice behind me, I've got this big painting that's made up of a bunch of different little panels. If I try to photograph it like this, it's going to be really difficult. As you can see, there's a lot of other clutter around, and I'd never get a really clean shot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take each one of these panels, I'm going to photograph it separately. And then I'm going to piece it together in Photoshop, which I'm going to show you, to create the painting basically as you see it on the wall. Except for it'll be a lot cleaner without any of the dirty wall and any of this clutter behind it. To do that, I'm going to need some equipment. First, one thing that's going to make this job a lot easier is if I have a tripod. And I'm going to be able to set this up and then get the camera exactly lined up where I need it. And then I can just change the paintings in and out as I take the picture. Nothing's going to move, the camera's going to stay right in place, and I'm going to be able to control everything about the scene. Now the other thing that you're going to need to photograph your artwork is really good lighting. Now if you don't have good lighting like this, then you can use the outdoors actually. And if you find a place that has sort of a shaded light that is like the side of your house or a building where the sun isn't directly going to hit the artwork, but it's got a lot of nice soft fill light, that's going to work perfectly. But if you do have lighting, that's even better because then you can control it and it makes it a little bit easier. The main thing is you don't want lighting that's going to tint or color the actual colors that your artwork is. So you want to get something that's kind of neutral. And I'll write down the details in the description. Okay, so I'm going to set up the tripod now, and I'm going to start by just getting the height about where I think I'm going to line up all the paintings. So I want to set it up so that it's about 6 to 8 feet back from the painting, depending on the lens that I'm using. And on this camera right now, I'm using the Sony a7R IV, and I've got a 35mm lens on it. So if I'm about 6, 7, 8 feet back, this should give me a nice angle of view to photograph all of these. So what I want to do is just get the tripod at sort of a general level. This is probably too high, I can tell already, because when I hang these, I'm going to hang them probably about this level so that I can put the tripod and the camera. I want it to be dead even with the center of each painting. So I'm going to find the place that works for all of these and then just sort of have a general area. So another thing I want to show you are the lights that I'm using. I'm using these Godox, these are video lights, and they're a constant light that can be adjusted the amount of light that it outputs. These are really useful because the light coming out of these is very neutral. And the other thing about these lights is that I can put this big umbrella on, this big diffuser, and that's going to give me a lot softer light. It's also going to reduce reflections on the actual paint surface itself because this diffuser kind of diffuses the lights and you're not going to have a really strong hot light source. When I'm setting up these lights, I like to set them up kind of at an angle from both sides. Now in this studio, I've got a lot of lights because I paint here, so they're set up pretty well right now. But I'm going to adjust them a little bit here and there when I'm taking the photograph because even with the lights the way they are now, I do get some hot spots every once in a while. And so I want to try to eliminate those from the photographs so that I don't have a lot of touch-up to do when I'm editing them. And sometimes you can't even edit out those really hot spots. So I like to try to angle the lights kind of from both directions, and then if I can, have another light coming from the top. Now that's going to give me a nice even light source. If the painting is really big, I might even try to light the bottom so that it's kind of almost lit from all the way around. That's the best way to do it. But like I showed you in a clip a second ago, you can set them on the side of a building or your house or something, as long as it's got indirect light, and they'll be lit really evenly. Okay, so another thing I forgot to mention were the lights that I'm using up here. If you don't want to spend a bunch of money to get lights that have a soft box and are color corrected and temperature controlled, you can just use these clip-on lamps that you get from like Home Depot. These work really well, and this is what I've used for a lot of years. The problem is that they will produce kind of hot spots on the paintings because there isn't a diffuser over them. Now you could probably get an umbrella and try to diffuse them that way, and that would be a cheaper alternative. But what I like to do is just use these for the studio lights because I'm not really as worried about the hot spots during that time. But for photographing, I like it to be a more neutral light and to be more controllable. Now, with these clamp-on lights, the light bulbs that I like to use are a daylight, kind of neutral white, and those work really well. They're kind of equivalent to the more expensive lights, but they definitely are cheaper, and you can buy just the bulbs that will go in a regular light socket. Okay, so I've moved the big paintings, and now I'm going to put them back on the wall, but a little bit lower, so that the center is somewhere down here. And then I'm going to line up the lights and get everything set up to shoot those larger works. Now I'm probably going to have to move stuff around and probably change my screw holes and stuff for the smaller paintings, but it shouldn't be too much work. So you don't have to use a level, but if you want everything to be nice and level on the wall, of course one of these can come in handy. But since my tripod has a ball head on it, I can just adjust that to the angle that I need anyways. So I'm going to make sure that it's pretty level. It's exactly level. But if it was a little bit off, it wouldn't really matter that much. So now I'm going to set up the camera. And what I want to do is make sure that the middle of my camera lens is exactly with the middle of my painting. Because what I don't want is for the thing to get skewed so that when I am in Photoshop, I don't have to like bring out the edges. This is kind of the most important part, is getting this camera set up so that it's perfectly perpendicular to the wall. And so you want the plane of your painting and the plane of your camera sensor to be exactly even. So this is where the most setup is going to come in, but once I have it set up on the tripod, I'm not going to have to probably redo it. What I like to do is I like to bring the camera closer to the wall where the painting is, and then get kind of an eye line of where I need to lower it to. That looks just about perfect. I might raise it back up just a little bit. Okay, so that is close enough for now. Now I'm going to bring the camera back to where I fill the frame with the painting. Okay, so in my camera I have a built-in level, so I'm going to use that to level up everything out here. If I need to, I can just make kind of micro adjustments by looking at it. But like I was saying before, is I want to fill as much of the camera frame as I can with the painting, because this has a nice big sensor on it, so I'm going to get a really high quality image out of it. And if I can use more of it, then I get a bigger file. So since I'm using a DSLR here, I'm going to shoot it in RAW, and that's going to give me the most control over the color and the edit that I need. So then I can be on my computer looking at the painting and fine-tuning it to get the color exactly how I want. I shoot it in RAW, and I keep my color balance at about the same as the white balance for these lights, which is around 5,000 Kelvin. So if I was shooting this with my phone, which a lot of you might do, it's kind of the same thing. Instead of using a tripod like this, if you don't have it, you can use anything. Use a table, a chair, whatever you need. And you can just try to steady your phone, line it up, try to make sure it's square within the picture frame, and just take the photos. You can get a a little holder for your phone that would actually fit on a tripod also. And they're not too expensive. You could probably get one on Amazon for under 20 bucks. That way you could hook it up to a tripod, and instead of having a DSLR here, I could just use my phone. Okay, so here's where I'm gonna set this up so that I get my painting exactly in the middle of this frame. And I'm using the guidelines that I have built into the camera and the level to make sure that everything is nice and square. So that looks pretty good. Okay, now that I've got my camera all set up, I wanna make sure that my settings are correct. So what I wanna make sure I'm doing, since I'm on a tripod, is I wanna get the best quality images I can. And by putting my ISO at the lowest ISO that the camera will go to, the base ISO, that would be 100 on this camera. That's gonna give me the cleanest file to work with. Now, you can see once I changed that it got really dark. So what I need to do is let more light in. So I can drop down the aperture, but that's gonna give me a softer image. This lens, probably the sharpest f-stop for this lens is gonna be somewhere around f8. So I'm going to put it at about f8, and then I need to change my shutter speed to be correct. Since it's on a tripod, I'm not gonna worry about the shutter speed because this is gonna keep it nice and stable. So you can see I have to lower my shutter speed quite a bit. In the past, I used to worry about doing gray cards and all that stuff and trying to get the white balance set up with that. But since digital cameras are much easier to correct all that stuff in Lightroom or Photoshop, I don't really worry about it too much. In the old days of taking slides or other images that I would use for artwork, I would have to color correct and white balance, and it was a real pain. So I'm gonna put it on manual focus, and I'm going to zoom in and make sure that my image is really sharp. It's always better to do this with manual focus, and I can see exactly how sharp my image is going to be. As long as I don't move the tripod, I shouldn't have to adjust anything anymore. It should be really sharp, and every painting, since they're all the same thickness, should be the same sharpness. So now, if I press down the shutter, at 1/8 of a second, I might get a little bit of camera shake in my shots, and that's gonna decrease the sharpness. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to set my camera to just use a 2-second timer. That way, when I press down the shutter, like this, it's gonna give it a second, and then it'll take the shot. Now I wanna review that image and make sure it looks good. Yeah, that looks real sharp. Now I could see in this frame that the bottom is a lot darker than the top. It's good, I'm not getting any glare from the lights that I'm using, but the bottom is definitely a little bit darker. So what I wanna do is take one of these other lights that I have, since I have them, and I'm going to lower it and try to hit the bottom of my image a little bit better. So I've adjusted this light now to fill in some of this bottom part of this painting. I was finding that it was a lot darker down here, and the bottom of the painting was probably a stop darker than the top was. So I've decreased some of the other lights that I have up here, and I've tried to hit down here a little bit more. I think I've got it pretty even now, and I'm ready to take a couple more test shots. It's still a little bit dark in the bottom left corner, but I can probably brighten that up in Photoshop and make it look right. What I'm going to do now to make sure that I get this exactly correct is I'm going to take the card out and look at them on the monitor to make sure that they're good. Then I'll shoot the rest of them, and that should go pretty quick. Okay, so I just went over to the computer and uploaded some images, and I'm glad I did because I noticed a couple of things. What the reading is and what it looks like on the back of your camera is never what it's actually going to look like on your computer. And I forgot to mention that last time. The one thing I do look at is the histogram, which I didn't show you, but I always look at the histogram on the back of the camera and make sure that it's somewhere right in the middle, that it's not all the way over to the left and it's not all the way over to the right. And that was fine. But I noticed once I got the images on the computer that this corner is still way too dark. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna adjust some of the lights that I have and try to lighten this up and get it even again. Then I should be pretty good to go. The images were sharp, everything was in focus, and the color was pretty good. I just need to fix and resolve this lower corner. Okay, so what I just did was I lowered the light that I have over there on a boom stand, and I lowered it down to about this level, so that should fill this in a lot better. If that doesn't work, I may aim one of these other lights more down here again. And actually I think I'm gonna do that just to be safe. So that looks pretty even if I'm looking at it with just my eyes, but I'm gonna take another couple of test shots and check them out. So another thing I forgot to mention that I wanted to bring up really quickly. When you're shooting with a DSLR, the lens kind of has a sweet spot more toward the center of the image. And so while I was talking about filling the frame with as much of the image or as much of the painting as I could, you kind of want to be careful with artworks, because if I fill that frame entirely all the way out to the edge of that sensor, what's going to happen is that almost all lenses are softer over in the corners. So if I did that, what would happen was that my painting would be really sharp in here, but then out toward these edges, it would get blurry. And that would be purely because of the lens that I used. Now, almost every lens does that, and corner sharpness on lenses is really, it's never as sharp as in the center. So I do want to come in a little bit from those edges and try to use more of the sweet spot of the lens, which is going to be more toward the center. So I'll show you that on here. Okay, so if you notice on the back of the camera here, I don't have the actual painting all the way out here toward the edges. And I don't have it all the way toward the top or the bottom. And so what I do have is that it's kind of using more of the middle of the frame. And that's gonna give me the sharpest image. Out here toward the edges and even up toward the top and bottom are gonna be softer. And so I want to try to avoid that as much as possible. But something like this is probably gonna give me a really good image. Okay, so now that I've got all of the lights set up, my camera's set up, everything's set up perfect, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start taking all the shots. I'm gonna just trade out the paintings and then have to maybe raise and lower them a little bit to stay in line with the camera, but it should go pretty quickly. The other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna gather all the paintings that I've done over the last 6 months or so, all the ones I haven't shot, and I'm gonna get images of those. I like to do this all at one time to save myself the hassle of having to set up everything over and over. So another quick tip, if you have paintings that are about the same size, but one's vertical and one's horizontal, you can just turn the vertical one on its side and take the shot horizontally. As long as your lighting is set up pretty consistently and you don't have what's clearly like, you can tell that the top is lit differently, then you should be pretty good to shoot the thing sideways and then just flip it in Photoshop. So one thing I like to do when I'm shooting a bunch of different paintings of different sizes is I kind of try to batch them together by size. That way if I do have to move the screws around, which inevitably I probably will, I can kind of move them and then do a batch of like 3 or 4 or 5 and then do the next ones and the next ones. So I've taken care of all the big ones, and now I'm just gonna kind of go through and start going down by size. And eventually I'll be done. Okay, so now that I've moved some of these down a little bit, I'm just going ahead and shooting them all. The one thing I would do if these were of a different, if these weren't all one painting, I would move my camera in closer for these smaller ones so that I could actually fill more of that frame. But since I'm gonna be putting them in all one image when I put them in Photoshop, I don't want to change the scale of them, because then I'd have to try to resize them and get them to be the same as the other paintings. So if I leave everything set as is and I just shoot them a little bit smaller, then they'll be the correct size when I put them into one document in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm finally done, and this is the last one. Now I'm gonna upload these onto Photoshop and I'm gonna show you how I edit them. Okay, so I uploaded all the images to Lightroom, and now I'm gonna go through and show you how I'm going to edit them.